The city of New York declares social media a public health hazard. That's as the U.S. Congress considers reining in big tech companies. Is online content dangerous to one's mental health? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The executives of the largest social media platforms were grilled in the U.S. Congress about the lack of safety for young people online. Parents claim that the unchecked content has led to child exploitation and even suicide. The creator of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, made a public apology. His social network just turned 20 years old, a period not without controversy. Mark New has more from San Francisco.
I need to do something substantial in order to get the attention.
As depicted in the movie The Social Network, in 2003, Harvard student Mark Zuckerberg created a site called FaceMash to rank the attractiveness of women. That juvenile idea was the seed for what eventually blossomed into Facebook, now the largest app in the world with more than 3 billion active users.
A way of rating women and where we got to now, I don't know that we necessarily got better, we just got different, right?
But as users willingly shared information, Facebook got careless with that data. In 2018, a whistleblower discovered that the company Cambridge Analytica had used data from 50 million Facebook profiles to better target political messages to people who could potentially be swayed. We spoke to security expert Ahmed Benafa at the time.
And I consider the like button or the like option here is the most significant invention in social media because it's in a very liberal way everywhere.
Controversy continued to build in 2021 when former Facebook employee Frances Haugen told Congress that the platform's own data showed it spreads misinformation and harms children. But several weeks later, Facebook was already moving in another direction, even changing its name to reflect its new focus.
Starting today, our company is now Meta. Our mission remains the same. It's still about bringing people together.
But a focus on the metaverse has yet to pay off financially, nor to keep it from facing the wrath of both Democratic and Republican lawmakers who want to curb social media's influence.
We haven't passed any of these bills because everyone's double talk, double talk. It's time to actually pass them. And the reason they haven't passed is because of the power of your companies.
Let me ask you this. There's families of victims here today. Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now?
Well,
they're here. You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures. Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
I'm sorry for everything that you've all knowing that have to go through the things that your families have suffered, and this is why we invested so much.
That apology was in January. The same month, Zuckerberg announced Meta's new emphasis, building a super artificial intelligence.
It's become clearer that the next generation of services requires building full general intelligence.
Has Meta or Facebook earned the public trust to build an artificial general intelligence?
No, we have data over the years that shows that Facebook is the least trusted of the big tech companies.
But that won't stop Zuckerberg from pursuing his grand vision. In his latest address on Facebook, he said they'll be making massive investments in infrastructure in order to bring the power of AI into the metaverse. He closed that post by saying, "We're just getting started." Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
To discuss social media and its effects on teenagers, let's bring in our panel. Jay Wolfson is a professor of public health at the University of South Florida. He joins us from Tampa. Here in Washington, D.C., Sahar Khamis is an associate professor at the Communications Department at the University of Maryland. Also here in D.C., Danielle Castro is Vice President of Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And Ray Wang is the Principal Analyst and founder of Constellation Research. He joins us from Silicon Valley in California. Welcome to all of you. Jay Wolfson, let me start with you. We just saw pictures of that hearing that took place in the United States Congress just a few days ago. Now, many parents at that hearing claimed social media was behind the deaths of their children, caused by drug overdoses, suicide, and in some instances, online bullying. New York City went a step further and said that social media is a public health hazard. That's what the mayor designated it. Let's listen to Eric Adams.
Companies like TikTok, YouTube, Facebook are fueling a mental health crisis by designing their platforms with addictive and dangerous features. We cannot stand by and let big tech monetize our children's privacy and jeopardize their mental health.
So, Jay, what is your view? Is social media at its core a mental health issue?
Not necessarily at its core, Anand. I think social media is a vehicle, like cars and the radio and television and all the technologies we've come to rely upon in our complex lives. And to point to it alone as being a bad thing really reflects on us and the responsibilities as citizens that many of us have abrogated. We've lost control over what our children watch. We lost control over what they do, and then we blame others when they get in trouble. That's not to say that social media hasn't created fora in which bad things happen. But you know, there's a question about whether we identify something as being controllable, that New York says it's a public health hazard. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to control these things? Should something be controlled? Can it be controlled? And ultimately, should we not go back to a fundamental basis for control, and that is my role as a father, my role as a parent, my role as a member of my community, and determine whether or not the government really should be playing a role in regulating things that I rely upon every day to use that have a tremendous amount of advantage, especially in healthcare, where social medias have been fabulously successful and useful in managing diseases and communicating things to groups of patients who have similar concerns, in networking and relationships, in supporting even teenagers with their healthcare conditions. So it's easy, I think, in our media world, point a finger who we think is a bad guy. They may have some problems. The greatest challenge is to look at ourselves and say, what do we establish as being the guidelines for acceptable behavior for our households, for our government, and how do we think that we can begin to control things that we think are bad? We can regulate, we can have speed limits, people speed, we can have food requirements in terms of content, things still get put in there. Ultimately, in this country, the government has historically not played an aggressive role in interfering in the lives of people. That's begun to change in these last few years, and our question as a society, legally and culturally, is should something be controlled? Can it be controlled, and how can it be controlled?
Right, Jay, those questions that you posed there, I mean, those questions about how one establishes these guidelines, of course, as you point out, one of the responsibilities is the responsibility of the parent. It's good parenting. But would it also need a bit of help from the regulators, from the government in this instance?
It may, and other countries have regulated aspects of social media. Florida has recently begun to initiate legislation that would ban the use of social media by people under 16 years of age and require that social media companies verify ages. California has passed some laws that restrict or punish the abuses of social media by harming people. These are interesting ideas, but social media has become so complicated and so pervasive.
Yeah.
I'm eager to hear some of my colleagues on the call imagine how the technology itself can be controlled without a government basically controlling and shutting it down, which is what some countries have started to do.
Okay, let's go to Daniel. Daniel, the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, we heard him there. He also said that platforms like Instagram, TikTok, X, and Facebook are addictive with dangerous features. What is your view on this?
Well, you know, during the pandemic, we heard a lot of elected officials say we should follow the science. And I think when it comes to social media, we should follow the science here too. And the science is still untested. We see evidence on both sides of the argument. Some saying there are problems, some say there aren't. If you look back at the American Psychological Association, just last year, they put out a statement saying that using social media is not inherently beneficial or harmful to young people. The fact is, as Jay was saying, it really depends on how people use it. And so, you know, some of these blanket statements where they're really trying to, we're seeing policymakers try to shift all the blame for the bad things we're seeing happen, you know, teens overdosing, online bullying. You know, these are things that happened that will continue to happen as long as young people are online, as long as they're congregating in any space. That's the space where these types of activities will happen. And it just happens that right now you know, a lot of people are getting on social media and they're getting on some of these platforms. The question is, of course, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
And who can do something about it? And that's where, you know, it really comes back to empowering both the parents and the children, the youth that are on these platforms, to take steps to address some of this problematic behavior, but we're not going to be able to eliminate it. And we have to recognize that we've seen these types of panics before. You know, 20 years ago, everyone was up in arms about video games. And we saw the same type of debate, you know, video games causing violence among youth, and similar types of accusations that it was up to the industry to solve this. And we needed legislation to solve this, much of it coming from New York as well. And, you know, at the end of the day, we've seen that the evidence really doesn't back it up. So, you know, my main message to policymakers is we need to continue to follow the evidence. We do need more research, and there might be some evidence-backed research that says, you know, if we make certain changes on social media, that will have a positive impact on youth, and we make other changes that will be harmful. But the problem is we don't know exactly what those changes are right now. And we need to be studying that more. And that's where, you know, we should be working together instead of just trying to kind of pass the buck on who's responsible for these problems.
Right. Ray, some of the companies that are at the center of this debate, this controversy, if you want to call it that, now they have introduced some features to help. They give parents control over how much time, for instance, their children spend online. But is that enough? And, you know, Daniel was talking a moment ago about, you know, empowering parents to exercise greater control over this. I mean, does that mean, that empowerment mean legislation?
It doesn't have to be. And as Daniel and Jay were saying, it's really important to follow the science. I actually have a master's in public health as well, to add to some of Jay's comments. What we really need is more funding and research to understand how the mind works, especially adolescent minds. One of the things that many successful parents have done is they've tried to give their kids space to think, right? Imagine putting a child with 2 hours of free time. What would they occupy it with if they didn't have a device or they weren't watching a video? And there's some research that's moving in that direction that helps us figure out how much media, how much video, how much attention kids should have to be able to think on their own, to be able to use with their own time versus being bombarded by information and insights. But that's just one aspect of the research album. There's other research that's going to be important. We saw something that popped up the other day that said, you know, middle-aged women were most susceptible to depression from social media. That was a kind of interesting research that popped up there. But I think the point was being able to multitask, being able to multi-thread, absorb information at speed. That's what we need to spend some time with between the neurosciences, public health, and understanding behavioral science. I think that's going to be an area where we can actually start the research. Now, is that industry working with academia, working with policymakers to fund that research? I think that might be the right path, but we should follow the science, because if we don't, we're going to continue to make policy decisions that are irrational, ideological, and not founded by any sense of data.
Sahar, great to see you. It has been some time. Let's get to that hearing in Congress. We saw the Meta CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, stand up at one stage. We saw that in the report. He turned around, he apologized to parents who were present in the room there. You know, the Guardian newspaper reported on this, and they compared what they saw, this particular performance, to a fireworks display. They said, look, it's spectacular and it's thrilling for a few minutes, but then we are back to darkness. I mean, do you agree with that characterization? More theater than substance?
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again after such a long time. And I think it's a very important issue, very important debate. I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I'd love to see this kind of discussion also at higher levels. I mean, when the government talks about this whole issue of social media and quote-unquote social media regulation, you do need to have some kind of advisory board that is really made up of experts across the board. Experts in psychology, in health, in public health, in communication, information technology, you name it, across the board. And this kind of advisory board can really give some kind of substantial, useful, and innovative recommendations and insightful comments and remarks about the pros and cons posed by social media. I do agree with the view. It is really a vehicle. It is really a tool. And I actually use the analogy of a double-edged sword. It does have pros. It does have cons. We just have to navigate this kind of space safely. And in order to do so, we need to have this kind of advisory board, in my opinion, that can offer some kind of useful insight And I also think we need to have a very important, curriculum on media literacy and social media safety and literacy from K to 12 and also in higher education. That's just my 2 cents. But going to your question about the whole thing that happened in Congress and Zuckerberg, apologizing for the parents, I think it does have symbolic value.
Yeah.
At least that social media CEOs should have some level of accountability. That's a very important issue. I'm a big fan of accountability, right? As adults, we should own our own actions. And if you are a CEO of a company like Meta, you really have, these millions of followers and people who are all over the globe using this kind of content across the board, young, old, and, rich, poor, you name it, and especially young people and children who are very much vulnerable and susceptible. Yes, you should own up to your own actions, and therefore this kind of apology to me has some kind of symbolic value.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to establish this accountability moving forward in much better and much more effective ways.
Jay, the United States Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, he wrote an opinion piece last year, and I'm quoting him here. He said, "It is no longer possible to ignore social media's potential contribution to the pain that millions of children and families are experiencing." So that's what Vivek Murthy had to say last year. But there was a major study which was done by researchers at Oxford University, at the university's Internet Institute. They examined 2 million people, they monitored 2 million people for 17 years, and they found no correlation between social media usage and mental health issues. So where does that leave us?
Well, I saw that study, I read it, and thanks for sharing it in advance. I didn't see the data in the study. I simply saw the general report, and all of these, the background data are terribly important. As my colleagues have said, you want to follow the science, but you want to see what the science is based upon. You want to know how valid the data are, how good the instruments were. Again, it's easy to cast aspersions.
Yeah.
Guns are a major issue in this country. And there's this a comic strip that shows a man standing next to somebody who's holding a sign saying, guns kill people. And he's holding a sign that's saying, spoons made me fat. We can blame the vehicle, and ultimately it's up to us, I think. It's much too easy, as my colleagues have suggested, to cast aspersions on third parties without coming back. I think the Surgeon General is right in saying there's a problem, but it's easy to throw something out as a broad net. I agree with Sahar that experts talking about these things, but using quality data. The challenge with the quality data, though, is that we don't know who to trust any longer. During this last COVID experience, we had all kinds of misinformation and fake news and AI creating all kinds of things people are saying, and it's not even the people who are saying it. Yeah. So we have to stand back and say, what are we really trying to do, and how can we rationally address this without overreacting and diverting huge amounts of resources toward black swans that really don't make a difference?
That's a great point.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
That's a great point. I mean, take China as an example. TikTok in China, it's designed to help you. It gives you nudges. It follows behavior science to help you improve your lives, learn something, expand your horizons, develop a new skill. TikTok in the U.S. is about entertainment and selling more ads. That's a really good, example of this dual use that's going on. We can set policies and incentives to get people to create content that's more useful or incentivize behavior. You can take a Fogg behavioral model, BJ Fogg at Stanford pioneered this, to actually take motivation, ability, prompts, those nudges to get people to do good things as well. It's just that we haven't been incentivized commercially to do that in this type of market.
Daniel, getting back to the United States Congress, Congress is considering regulatory measures. Here is the United States Senator Lindsey Graham. Let's listen to what he said.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people. When we had cigarettes killing people, we did something about it, maybe not enough. You're going to talk about guns, we have the ATF. Nothing here. There's not a damn thing anybody can do about it. You can't be sued.
So, Daniel, listening to Lindsey Graham, they're very tough words, very provocative words in many respects. But you posted something on X about AI-generated images of the United States pop star Taylor Swift, you said, I'm quoting you here, you said, my take on non-consensual sharing of fake, explicit, AI-generated images. In this case, the problem is not that technology is moving too fast, it is that lawmakers are moving too slowly. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, so on the Taylor Swift controversy, you know, there are these images that have been shared about her, obviously without her consent, fake images, and we've seen this happen to many celebrities, predominantly women, and as well this happens to individuals. And we've known about this problem now for years. You know, the technology to create these images isn't new. And we've known one way to solve this is to make it illegal to do this type of sharing. We have laws in about 50 states, 48 states right now, almost all 50 states, that prohibit what they call revenge porn, non-consensual sharing of real images. And about a dozen states have made it illegal to also share these images when they're fake. So when I say that, you know, lawmakers are moving too slow, you know, it's often, you know, we see a problem like this and we see that there's a technology hook and we say, well, is this a problem with technology? And my point is, you know, we've known that this is a problem for years. And this is a clear case where we have a very bipartisan solution, a solution that many states have implemented, but we have yet to pass a federal law that makes something like that illegal. And this is that low-hanging fruit where if we want to address some of the types of problems that occur online, you know, this is an easy step that we can take that, you know, we don't have to wait for the science. We don't have to wait to see what's coming next in terms of the technology. We know it's a problem. We know it's a problem that affects youth. Just last year, there was a case in New Jersey where there were, you know, about a dozen high school students that were sharing fake images of their classmates online. And, you know, this is something that has tremendous effects for people online. And, you know, when we talk about what problems are we going to see 2, 3, 4 years from now, this is the type of problem we're going to see online. And this is where we should take action now and have legislators take action now, rather than waiting for, you know, the next decade, and then we have a hearing saying that there's more blood on people's hands when we could have done something today.
Daniel, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
I see where you're going, but comparing it to print media, where people can be slanderous or they can be libelous in what they say they do, we can find that individual, we can extract that thing that was printed and published, but and we can sue people for doing bad things, individuals. How would you envision creating a law? What would it do to restrict the companies that manage and control the social media from allowing these things to happen? What kind of technical policing system would you imagine being put in place?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, well, I don't think the solution is to go after the intermediaries that could be used to share, just like you don't necessarily go after the person who delivered your newspapers to, you know, sue the newspaper for something somebody wrote there.
Yeah.
In this case, you want to go after the individuals who are actually posting the content or sharing the content online. So, for example, in New Jersey, at this high school, you would go after the students that shared that. In other cases, you would be going after, you know, specific individuals who are going online and putting that information out there.
Okay, Sahar, on the question of the positive impact of social media, I mean, Ray was talking about it a moment ago. There are content creators who post good information on things like health, on things like fitness, book recommendations, for instance. I mean, is this a question of balance, yeah? And how does one achieve that balance?
I mean, the whole idea of the double-edged sword of social media is really at the heart of this whole discussion and this whole debate, right? I mean, you can have a lot of positive things going on in social media, like you said, you know, health and fitness. And if you look at the broader, you know, geopolitical, for example, movements, socio-political transformation, transitions, for example, you know, in whole regions of the world, social media acted as amplifiers of the voices of the people, acted as accelerators and catalysts for political and social change, very important vehicles for dynamic social political transformation. That's at the macro level, the large level. At the micro level, you can talk about things like educating yourselves about many, many things that's happening in today's world. Information is at your fingertips at a speed and a broad spectrum that was not possible in the past, and the list can go on and on and on. Yet at the same time, as we've been saying all along in this discussion, there are also a lot of threats. And the threats can also be at the macro level and the micro level. It can go from, child trafficking, different, terrorist groups trying to recruit certain members who are usually preteens. We're talking about 12 and 13-year-old kids, to child pornography and sexual abuse, and the list can go on and on. So the whole thing, in my opinion, here is the elephant in the room is the question of regulation, social media regulation. Who regulates what, why, how, when, and where? And I think that there's no easy answer to this question, but I'll just say one thing quickly, that there's always a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Whenever the government sets foot and interferes, you're always afraid that that's also going to come with a price. And the price can be curbing the margin of freedom and even having some kind of political restrictions, which is why I advocate for some kind of, platform or some kind of board that brings together expertise from those who know better about the media and how social media works to provide the government with some kind of counseling and advice. And I think that would be the best format.
Okay, Ray, Sahar was talking there about regulation, and to some extent, social media companies are regulating themselves. I mean, not everybody agrees with the way they regulate themselves. I mean, there's something called shadow banning, where in-house content analysts, or call them censors if you want, determine unsuitable content. They delete that content. They red flag the creators of that content. We've seen that happen recently with posts on the conflict that's going on in Gaza right now. Is that process, though, a bit too subjective?
That is a very difficult process. That's a manual process. And what we're about to see is an exponential rise of misinformation and disinformation. Half of the world's population is about to elect a leader. And what we're competing is humans versus bots. That's not even a fair fight. So we're going to have to develop new types of technologies. Out here in Silicon Valley, we've been reviewing some technologies that are being used to fight against misinformation and disinformation. And they all have an AI component. It has to be at machine scale to be able to combat that. And one way is to validate if that's someone's real content and watermark that. But there's another way to actually figure out how to build a registry against that so that people know what is real and platforms know what to do to validate that.
Okay, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.